I'll mute us.
And we will be starting in just a moment. Excellent, Ashley. Great, April. And with Global Conservation Force, Ashley, yep, and Chris, great. Thank you all for putting your names and the organizations that you're with in the chat, and the Indigenous territory where you're calling in from. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, good morning. My name is Emily Young. I am with the Nonprofit Institute at the University of San Diego, and we are in Indigenous territory of the Kumeyaay Nation here in San Diego. And welcome to this fourth webinar of our 6-part series, Leaders for Outdoor Equity. This session is going to focus on challenges in outdoor access and land management, looking at climate change and environmental justice. And as we get started, we'd again like to have you share in the chat your name and your organization and Indigenous territory where you are located. And if you didn't have a chance to join us for the first 3 webinars, Michelle Robidas is going to put the links in the chat for you. We have had such an amazing group of really inspiring speakers so far. You can take a listen to all of them just by following the links to our YouTube channel at the Nonprofit Institute. You can also see the speakers' full bios for all of the people today, because we're not going to read them out loud all together because it will take up too much time, and there's such an amazing group of speakers. And so again, I'm Emily Young. I'm with the Nonprofit Institute here at the University of San Diego, and we have partnered with Outdoor Outreach, the Outdoor Foundation, Thrive Outside San Diego, the San Diego Foundation, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to put on this webinar series for you. And the purpose of Leaders for Outdoor Equities as a webinar series is to give land managers and recreational leaders from public agencies, nonprofits, and the outdoor industry an opportunity to learn about the vital role of outdoor access and public lands in our health, well-being, and quality of life. It's also meant to deepen our understanding and leadership skills around issues of race and equity as they relate to the outdoors. And it's with this in mind that I want to take a moment to acknowledge that our communities in San Diego sit on the ancestral homelands of the Kumeyaay Nation. We extend our respect and gratitude to the Kumeyaay peoples who have lived here since time immemorial. During our previous webinar, we talked about the systemic challenges in outdoor access and land management, particularly looking at physical and functional barriers. By raising awareness as to what some of these barriers look like for different groups of people and how we can alleviate their negative impacts, we can all start improving outdoor access with an eye toward equity and inclusion in all of our own work. And here are just some of the highlights that we heard from our speakers last time. Miriam Solis-Coronel encouraged us not only to bring diverse voices to the table, but bring them into the prep kitchen, to involve everyone in policy and planning processes, and to share power and a sense of place, co-creating experiences and even recruitment. Heidi Bonbloom noted that when we bring everyone to the prep kitchen, we're choosing the complicated and right approach rather than the simple and wrong approach. And with incremental and obviously frustratingly slow change, we can, as a community, increase our empathy for one another. Julie Corrales shared how redlining still affects us today. Those who live in affluent areas in cities rarely visit underserved communities and witness the inequities brought about by redlining that still exist today. And as leaders in the environmental and outdoor sectors, We all need to rethink what the outdoors represent to an increasingly diverse public, and who are the experts in stewarding natural resources? How can we all together create more inclusive and equitable access to the outdoors? Today's webinar will pick up where we left off on these themes to discuss outdoor access in relation to climate change and environmental justice. And despite the numerous benefits that there are to being outdoors, psychological, spiritual, and physical, we still lack inclusivity and equity in this space. So we come together in this series to rethink the outdoors. And with that in mind, as with any educational experience, this series may challenge your current understanding of our public lands and related issues of conservation, access, and use. So we encourage you to sit with and reflect upon the insights and perspectives that are offered by our different speakers today, because you're all going to be a part of what happens next. And now I'd like to turn this session over to Chantel Jimenez, who is the Urban Refuge Coordinator at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And Chantel will be facilitating the conversation among our speakers today. Chantel?
Great, thanks, Emily. Good morning, everyone. And thanks to Emily for setting the tone for today's session. What I would like to do to start today is to create a word cloud. Michelle would be putting a link into the chat for our word cloud. And what I would like everybody to do is to think about what is one word that comes to mind when you're thinking about climate change, environmental justice, and the outdoors. So in the chat, Michelle's dropped that link. You can go to that link and type in what word comes to mind. And then we'll be able to take a look and see what word is the biggest within the word cloud. So we'll just take a minute to do that. Michelle's going to share the screen. Thank you. It's like people are typing. That's great. Racism seems to be getting a little bigger. Inequity is getting a little bigger. Unequal. Intersectionality, that's a good one. Trauma. Hope, that's a good one. It's a good way to start. Inertia. Awakening. Thanks, Rusty, for just throwing that in the chat. Displacement, education. That's great for me. Something I do a lot. In the outdoors. These are all really, really good. So keep typing in there. We'll just do this for like maybe 1 more minute. Awesome. Well, we'll keep that on the screen and see if anyone else continues to type. I'm going to talk a little bit now, sort of what, well, thank you for doing that. We'll save that and then we'll be able to share it with the group at a later time. We're going to talk a little bit about today's format. I have the pleasure of moderating this session with a lot of speakers today. And so it is going to be a bit of a different format than what we've did in some other sessions. And what we're going to do first is we'll hear from 2 speakers, Caroline Brouwer and Madeline Drake, who will provide national and then state level overviews of 30 by 30, followed by a moderated Q&A session that'll discuss access, tribal engagement, and what California Natural Resource Agency has identified as opportunity and challenges to the San Diego area in regard to the 30 by 30 initiative here in California. After that session, we'll then move to an outdoor industry table talk where Steve Barker and Danica Carey will engage in a dialogue with each other, asking and answering questions back and forth. They'll just sort of throw things at each other, and we'll hear sort of what their perspectives are in terms of the outdoor industry. and what maybe 30 by 30 and the outdoors means to them. From there, we'll transition into a moderated panel discussion with Dr. Walt Lara Sr. and Victor Bolayetz, Martina Morgan, and Nina Hapner to discuss their perspectives on California parks and indigenous stewardships. So we got a full session today with a lot of great speakers, and I'm super excited to be the one moderating the session. Throughout today's program, as we explore issues of race, equity, and inclusion on public lands, think about where you see yourself in it. Think about what you can do from your role to be more of a leader for outdoor equity. We invite you to use this time and this space as an opportunity for both self-reflection as well as an opportunity to learn collectively and to examine the systems that we work in. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first two amazing speakers, Caroline Brouwer and Madeline Drake. Caroline is the Vice President of Governmental Affairs for the National Wildlife Refuge Association, and Madeline is the Biodiversity Coordinator for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Due to the many speakers that we're hosting today, their in-depth bios will be posted in the chat. For the next half hour, Caroline and Madeline are going to present and discuss the 30 by 30 from the national and then statewide perspective. So Caroline, let's start with you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chantel. I am really honored to be here and glad to talk to everybody about the national efforts on 30 by 30. I'm going to share my screen. Make sure I do it correctly. All right. There we go. Okay. So good morning, everybody. My name is Caroline Brouwer, and I have been with the National Wildlife Refuge Association for almost 7 years. And I've been working on conservation policy in Washington, D.C. for more than 13 years. I work on a lot of land protection, particularly within the National Wildlife Refuge System, which is a federal designation of public lands that protects wildlife habitat. These lands are federally owned for the benefit of wildlife populations, and most are open free of charge to anyone. So today I want to talk about the national effort to conserve 30% of lands and 30% of waters in the US by the year 2030. We all know the value of wildlands. Wildlife have a place to call home. People have a place to get outdoors, to hunt for your family, or to look at some birds, or whether it's just to take a deep breath. So first I want to talk about, oops, that didn't work. First I want to talk about, and the key is over on the right. So if the videos are blocking that, you might want to hit the little line at the top right to hide that. I want to talk about the big picture in the United States. So who owns lands here in this country? This graph roughly shows that. Lands change hands all the time, and they're constantly being bought and sold. So these numbers do change over time. As you can see, the majority of lands in the United States are privately owned, more than 60%. Federally owned lands come second at about 28%, state lands at 9%, and that tiny dark green wedge in there are lands that are held in trust by the United States on behalf of tribal nations. So that's what we're starting off with right now in 2021. So because my specialty is federal lands, I want to focus in on that light blue wedge at 28%. You might look at that and say, well, we're close to 30%. Even without all of these other lands, private lands, tribal lands, state lands being represented and protected, but you would be wrong. So these 4 land management agencies, the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and the National Wildlife Refuge System, administer the vast majority of federally owned lands. There are other agencies that have lands that are federally owned, the Army Corps of Engineers, the military, for example. But these 4 agencies manage most of it. Some of the lands protected under these 4 land designations are highly, highly used, and therefore don't meet the biodiversity requirements or the climate sequestration, or sorry, the carbon sequestration requirements of 30 by 30. For example, the Park Service, you see it's got 85 million acres right here. The Park Service has incredible lands, Yosemite, Yellowstone, the Great Smoky Mountains, and the Appalachians. But the reality is that they also manage places like the National Mall in DC or the Memorial Bridge that connects DC to Virginia. And even within a place like Yosemite, many of these lands are highly developed and they are not wildlife habitat. As another example, you can see here the Bureau of Land Management is responsible for 244 million acres of land. And while much of this is grasslands or protected monuments, the BLM also has a multiple use mandate, meaning that they use their lands for mining or oil and gas development. And these lands would not qualify to be counted under 30 by 30. And then even within the National Wildlife Refuge system, this dark blue slot right here, these 95 million land acres are protected for wildlife, but there are parking lots, visitor centers, that type of stuff. There are, in some instances, very, very few of farming on refuges. And since not all refuges own their subsurface rights or mineral rights, you can find some oil and gas development on refuges, particularly down on the Gulf Coast. So that's just to give you an idea of the challenges that we're looking at when we talk about federally protected land as being included under 30 by 30. So early this past summer, 2021, the Biden administration released their overview of 30 by 30. What is their plan? They're calling it America the Beautiful. They have identified these 8 principles to guide their effort, and you can see them over here. We're talking about collaborative and inclusive approaches to conservation, locally led efforts, tribal sovereignty, creating jobs along with protecting lands, and using science as a guide. This is the ideal. This is what they want to do, and this is what we are going to hold them to. The goal of what lands are going to be included in this, the goal is to protect lands and waters that enhance nature's contributions to people, ecosystem health, biodiversity, or the sequestration of carbon. So where are we now? As of 2020, only 12% of lands were protected to the standard, and 26% of waters were protected as well. That 12% is roughly 289 million acres. And in order to get to 30% by 2030, we are going to have to protect another 440 million acres of land in this next decade. So I want to go back to this bison chart and really talk about these federal lands. This slide right here, if you add all these acres up, just the land acres, I'm not talking about this, the light blue I'll get to in a second, but these 4 areas are the land acres. And that adds up to 617 million acres. But if only 289 million acres are conserved under current 30 by 30 parameters, we are really going to have to step up our game with federal land protection. And we are also going to have to start looking at inclusions of these other land designations. We are already talking about this. We are talking about including private lands, state lands, tribal lands as well. The 30 by 30, this America the Beautiful plan is not as fleshed out as, as it could be. So they've only been working on this for about 6 months now. So there's a lot of room for input and, really talking about what our priorities are. So I want to talk about water as well. So you can see on here, this light blue, part of the bison's rear end. The vast majority of the 26% of waters that are already protected under the 30 by 30 designation are included in the National Wildlife Refuge system. These are the 4 Pacific Marine Monuments and the 1 Atlantic Marine Monument. So that's 760 million acres of marine habitat. NOAA does have some protected water closer into the coastlines of the lower 48, the U.S. mainland, but it's not nearly as many acres. I think it's about 3 million acres. So the refuge system's marine monuments far exceed that. These marine monuments date back to 2006 when Bush II created them, and then into 2008 and 2009 when President Obama greatly expanded the acreage. And then the Atlantic Monument was created in mid-2016 by President Obama. So this all sounds great, right? We're talking land protection, collaboration with, oops, it's too early. Land protection, we're talking about collaborating with local communities and stakeholders, public meetings to hear from people who will be affected. We're talking land use requirements and taking those into consideration with sustainable hunting and gathering. But we have to remember that there is a lot of opposition to these proposals. Industry wants to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge.
Carolyn, could I just interrupt you really quick?
Sure.
I think when you're moving your notes around, we can sometimes hear it on your computer mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, it's okay. Sorry,
sorry
about
about
that.
So, we're talking about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, oil and gas development. There are other public lands where there is a lot of oil and gas drilling, mining. We're talking about nativists putting up fencing on the southern border, which is cutting off wildlife corridors and fragmenting habitat. And in addition to that, Congress has decimated funding to public lands over the last decade and plus, meaning that there is little money to go around for land management, biological work, or educational programs to bring kids out to nature. So the one thing that I want to talk to you about is that the President's 30 by 30 plan is not fully formed yet. We, the Refuge Association, and a lot of partners are talking to the administration about moving some Bureau of Land Management lands into the refuge system, for example, because they have a higher land protection status and value. We were talking to the administration about creating additional refuge units and expanding expanding existing refuges. But the administration needs to hear from people and organizations outside of DC and outside of these large conservation groups. They need to hear from Indigenous leaders about what tribal members need from 30 by 30. They need to know what hunting and harvesting rights are needed and where. They need to know what accessibility needs are for disabled Americans. And they need to know about language needs and signage. And I think that this is where we can help. And I'm happy to answer any questions after Madeline speaks. And I will go ahead and pass this off to Madeline.
Great. Thank you so much, Caroline. That was a really helpful overview of the federal efforts. Again, my name is Madeline Drake. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here and share with you all about California's 30 by 30 efforts and also learn from the conversation and other speakers today. So to give you all a brief overview of California's 30 by 30 initiative, in October of 2020, Governor Gavin Newsom signed his Nature-Based Solutions Executive Order in 8220, which as a whole elevated the role of natural and working lands in the fight against climate change and advancing biodiversity conservation as an administrative priority. As a part of this executive order, California committed to the goal of conserving 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. We're really excited to be part of an international movement to use conservation of natural areas to protect biodiversity and combat climate change. We're glad that over 60 countries, and that number keeps growing, have signed on to this pledge, including the US as a whole. So the executive order in California directs us to achieve 30 by 30 in a manner that addresses three key objectives. The first is to conserve our state's unique biodiversity, or the exceptional variety of life found in our ecosystems. We're lucky here in California to have things like the giant sequoia all the way down to the tiny mountain elf shrew. There are just thousands of species here that are found nowhere else on Earth and rely on California's diverse lands and seascapes as a habitat. The second is to use our lands to sequester carbon and increase our resilience to the effects of climate change. Things like intensifying wildfires, heat waves, floods, sea level rise, drought, they're already causing substantial damage to California's natural and cultural resources, communities, public health, and our economy. It's important we think about climate smart land management and provide a functional way to build resilience and achieve carbon neutrality in California. And third, and very importantly, is to improve equitable access to nature for all. So working to achieve 30 by 30 provides an opportunity for us to expand equitable access to recreation and benefits of being outdoors for all Californians. This will require consideration of not only which lands and coastal waters are conserved, but how they can be sustainably and equitably managed to reflect the needs and the interests of local communities here in California. So as a part of this executive order, we were directed to put together a strategy document that we're calling Pathways to 30 by 30. And that's where I come in. I'm leading the team that is writing this document. So over the past year, we've been trying to have a collaborative and inclusive process for gathering information from experts and people all across the state. So what in their view are our best opportunities for achieving 30 by 30. This Pathways document is going to identify what conservation means for 30 by 30 here in California, as well as our opportunities, strategies, and challenges for achieving our goals. It's really intended to set us on a path for successful implementation of 30 by 30. It's really just the start. What we're seeking to do is enable enduring conservation on a broad range of landscapes, including natural and working areas, in voluntary partnerships with land managers, natural resource users, and stewards across the state. At the same time that we're developing this document, the California Natural Resources Agency is also developing something called CA Nature, which is a geographic information system and will be a collection of publicly accessible interactive digital mapping tools. CA Nature will bring together maps of biodiversity, climate change, and access so that we can view and analyze those different features of the landscape all in one place. We're hoping this will help us identify places across California that have the most opportunity to achieve our 3 goals or 3 objectives. The state is also going to use CA Nature to assess what percentage of California is already conserved and track progress towards that 30% goal. We really recognize that public participation and input are critical for us to be successful in this effort. In January, the California Natural Resources Agency hosted a public engagement kickoff webinar that drew in over 800 people across the state. From there, they've hosted a variety of other events, starting with formal consultation process and listening sessions with California Native American tribes. They also launched the californianature.ca.gov website to serve as a portal for visitors to learn more about and to engage in our work. This past spring, we held 9 virtual regional workshops to gather place-based perspectives on 30 by 30. And in the summer, we held 5 topical workshops on the topics of climate change, equity, biodiversity, and conservation of lands and conservation of coastal waters. And finally, we released a public input questionnaire so that we could gather experiences and ideas from a broad cross-section of Californians. Soon, we're going to be releasing our Pathways to 30 by 30 document draft for public review and input, and we really look forward to receiving input and continuing this conversation and engagement as we move forward. The strategy document will then be finalized, as well as CA Nature, and implementation will begin in early of 2022. To stay up to date and get us to most up-to-date information, we really encourage you to visit our website, www.californianature.ca.gov, and stay tuned to that website as it's always updating. We really want this to be an open source website, an open source movement, because we know that one size does not fit all, and success is going to require creative solutions crafted with local communities. So we really hope, if you haven't already, that you will get involved and join us in this 30 by 30 movement in California. So that's a brief overview. Again, happy to answer questions and work with Chantel.
Great. Thanks, Madeline. And thank you, Caroline. We have a quick question that I'll just totally throw out to Lauren. She put in the chat, Madeline, she would love to hear more about California Nature and data sets that are currently slated to be included in the mapping feature.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a work in progress. We're hoping to release it with our draft, but it is going to be a lot of publicly accessible information that we include. So right now we're looking a lot of the state data that's available for biodiversity, things like the ACE data set, if you're familiar with that, with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, a lot of the climate change projections from our CalAdapt work here in California, and then we're working with state parks and other sort of local park communities and thinking about access. So, we want to make it publicly accessible on our website. We also welcome partners to provide data sets that they're willing to share, because it's going to be continually improved and continually updated as we move forward. So we're hoping to make it as inclusive as possible.
Great. Thank you for that, Madeline. Another one that Jackie threw out, do all states have a 30 by 30 plan, or is this something that, Special California is doing, or what have you seen, are other states kicking off things like this? What have you seen, Madeline? And we'll start with Madeline and then move to Caroline.
Yeah, there have been other states. I wouldn't say every state has their own 30 by 30 plan, but there have been other states that have been, have some type of executive order like we do, or have been pushing forward. I know Colorado, Hawaii, Nevada are some others that I heard of, and I would love to hear Caroline's perspective at the national level, because I'm sure she's heard of others as well.
I don't know specifically about the state level, about whether there are staffers working on this at the state level, but I do know that there are a lot of people working on this at the federal level. So, as far as Nevada goes, you're right, it is mostly federal lands. I think it's like 80+% or something in Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that's probably going to be a largely federal effort, I think, in Nevada, just because it's so heavily federal.
And Keandra, sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right, put something in the chat as a question. And I think that sort of leads into another question that I wanted to ask both of our speakers, is sort of the barriers and the challenges, looking at the definition of protecting or conserving these lands under the 30 by 30 and what that means in terms of the people that use the lands, how we recreate on public lands, and sort of what it is as a whole when we start to look at the different lands across the spectrum of the US, and what this very optimistic goal is looking to do, but how it potentially creates unintentional barriers and challenges along the way. So we'll start with Caroline at a bigger perspective. What are some challenges that you see with the 30 by 30?
Well, I've been in DC too long, and the pessimism has kind of creeped into my soul a little bit. I think that some of the biggest barriers that we have is people who don't want to lose money on the lands that they have. There's a lot of private lands that are highly protected. There are a lot of people who own land who really want their land to be in conservation value. A lot of these places are, adjacent to protected lands already. I do know that within the refuge system, there are a lot of people, a lot of private landowners outside of the boundaries of wildlife refuges who really want to protect their lands. They want it to be conserved for, their kids and their grandkids. And so I think that that's a positive. I mean, the barriers, I went through some of the barriers that I've anticipated at the very end of my slideshow. Funding is a huge problem. If we're going to be acquiring new parklands, or, moving lands from the BLM over to the refuge system, or paying private landowners to incentivize them to more highly protect their land, where's that money coming from? So I think the funding is a barrier. In places like the Arctic Refuge, or places that they're going to do oil and gas development or mining, those are, that's a barrier right there, because you've got people who want to make money off of these public lands, and people who want to make money off of private lands. So that's going to be a barrier as well. So for me, those are the biggest things. Funding is always, I get on my soapbox, talk about funding all the time, but that's a huge barrier.
Yeah, I think those are all, things that we're thinking about, the challenges we're considering. A couple of additional, or, really, how do we think about where we can maximize our opportunity and have as many benefits as possible for biodiversity, climate, and access in one place. So we're trying to develop the tools, but we also really need to continue meaningful conversations to make sure that the local communities are involved in those decisions as well. And things like biocultural significance, access, climate refugia are all being considered when we're identifying those opportunities. Additionally, one of the challenges or barriers we're thinking about is that the land not only needs to be conserved, but it needs to be managed. So even though 30% is sort of a numbers game, we recognize that we're not going to get the benefits if we just put a fence around it and don't appropriately manage it. So that's a good opportunity, again, to work with local communities and figure out what are the priorities, how can we manage it for their benefits, and where are there intersectionalities that we can learn from, things like traditional ecological knowledge, to make sure it's appropriately managed now and into the future. So those are some additional things that we're thinking about, and how can we make sure this effort, we're getting the benefits now, we're meeting our goals, and this is something that's going to benefit, our children's generations as well.
Thanks. Madeline, I'm going to stick with you. I know that there's a lot of participants on this call from San Diego, and so there's a real interest there in sort of what potentially the state's California by 30 by 30 plan has identified for San Diego, some challenges, some barriers, and opportunities within San Diego County. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, absolutely. So, thinking back to our topical or our regional workshop for the San Diego area, I think some of the challenges, and we've talked about these a little bit, are resources. So both funding and staff, and making sure that, it's appropriately, providing people the best opportunities as well. So a lot having to do with resources. In Southern California, there's a lot of development pressures, and is there enough land out there to keep conserved? And so thinking about just where can we put it when there's so much development in Southern California. We also hear a lot about, we're already experiencing impacts from climate change, wildfires, droughts, sea level rise on the coast, things like pollution. And we need to be thinking about how we can manage those areas and sort of protect the nature that's there. And then the need for more public awareness. How can we know that people know the benefits of conservation and are getting out into access that they need and know about these places? So there's a lot of the challenges we heard, but we did hear great opportunities as well, not just challenges. There's already a lot that's going well in San Diego. So building on some of those already successful programs like local conservation strategies and habitat plans, looking at land trusts that are already conserving land. For example, some of the ones that were brought to our attention were San Diego Habitat Foundation and Escondido Creek Conservancy down in Southern California that are already doing a great job of conserving land, and outdoor education programs that are already doing well that have been brought to our attention, like Groundwork San Diego and San Diego Foundation's opening the outdoor program. So how can we make sure that those things that are already working are adequately funded and build on them? And then we think about new opportunities, making sure again that we're finding where we can maximize our benefits, as we move forward. So a lot to think about. San Diego is, a thriving, complicated area, but a lot of great natural resources down there. And we really want to be inclusive of all habitats in the state.
We got a question in the chat from Les. How adaptive will the state, we'll start with the state, 30 by 30 plans be over the next 9-10 years as, demographics change, community needs change, and things shift in terms of, what it is that the state's planning to do and what the needs of the communities are?
That's a great question. And I do think it's something that we're still figuring out because we do want to set this up. So we want to hear from people on this, but some of our ideas are in the executive order. The executive order called out the California Biodiversity Collaborative, which brings together policy groups as well as scientists. And so making sure that they're engaged and continually updating the needs of the state is going to be really important. And then also figuring out how we can make sure that our conversations are inclusive and meaningful and moving forward, that it doesn't just end once we put out our sort of implementation document is going to be really important. So we're thinking about this, thinking how we can plan. We don't have it all figured out yet. We want to hear people's feedback, but we're hoping we can, yes, adaptively manage. We're going to keep learning, and that's the hope.
And Carolyn, what do you think about sort of the federal, I know the current secretary really is looking at equitable access to the outdoors for underserved communities. And, part of the 30 by 30, the American Beautiful, is really looking at how do we do that in a way that, for urban communities or people that don't have access to these vast public lands. How do you think the federal government's not quick to make change and pivots in 9 years, but some of the things that the 30 by 30 and American Beautiful is considering in the plan, looking at sort of as demographics of our country change?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really important. And I think that Deb Haaland is frankly perfectly placed right now. She's got a lot of great background and knowledge on, equitable access to the outdoors. I think, with, specifically what the Refuge system has done, I think over the last 10 years or so, 9-10 years for the urban program, has really set specifically the refuge system up to succeed at 30 by 30, because we're already talking about equitable access. We're already talking about these things. Those are already in the vocabulary of all of the people that I work with in Washington, D.C. on, how to, protect lands. This comes up in every meeting that we have, is how to, it's urban, it's rural, it's equitable access. How do you include everybody in these conversations? So I think that that's happening. I'm really glad that we've been having these conversations for the last, 10 years or so, because I really hope that it'll set us up for success in making sure that 30 by 30 works for everybody. But I think that people are going to have to make some noise and make their voices heard, and let people know what they want. They need to let, the state of California or, Interior Department know what is at stake for them and what kind of access they need for these lands. I mean, you can't just lock up 30% of lands and not let people on. And I don't think that's where they're going. But I think that it's really important that we have, some really open and honest conversations about what people need from land protection.
Agreed. Well, thank you. Thank you to the both of you. I know that people have been throwing some questions into the chat. So maybe as we shift, and Steve and Danica, to our next table sessions, if you could answer some of those, or if you got more questions for Carolyn or Madeline, feel free to put them in the chat. It's an exciting time, to think about what American the Beautiful and here in California might be doing to protect and conserve more lands. So thank you for those presentations. What we'll do now is I want to take a moment, for everybody to reflect on that, presentations, and think about, again, sort of where you see yourselves in these conversations, where you can continue to be an advocate for equitable access to the outdoors, how to continue to have the dialogue about challenges and barriers that your communities that you serve, or that the community that you're in, may face as these initiatives move forward. So just sit on that and reflect on that a little bit, and maybe at some later point in time, come back and reflect on those. So we're going to shift to our next session. Thank you again, Carolyn and Madeline. I would like to introduce our outdoor industry table talk speakers, Steve Barker and Danica Carey. Steve is the co-founder of Eagle Creek Travel Gear, as well as the co-founder of the Escondido Creek Conservancy and the Adventure Travel Conservation Fund. Danica is the director of marketing operations at the outdoor fitter company Serious Innovation. Due to time, again, their full bios will be posted in the chat. Take a look at them and see all the cool things that they do. Danica and Steve, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks, Chantel. That was great. Carolyn, Madeline, that was awesome. Learned a lot of good stuff. Good morning, Danica.
Good morning, Steve. I'm not sure they know what they're in for by just passing the mic to you and I and letting us go for it. But
well, I'm counting on you. I realize that Danica is Morning Star, so that means you're awake, and I'm counting on you to take me through this. So
yeah, yes, absolutely. I will lead on the questions. My name does mean Morning Star. I'm absolutely not a morning person, but I'm very excited to be here and so grateful for the lead in that we got on the 30 by 30 conversation. And, Steve and I are here to represent for the outdoor industry and what we see as the changes and the challenges that have happened along the way. Of which there are many, and we'll do our best to tackle what we can in the next 30 minutes. So, Steve, I'm going to start by asking you our question number one. So the outdoor industry has taken a number of steps over the last couple of decades. And I'd actually say some people within the outdoor industry over the last couple of decades. The last couple of years, we've definitely seen the outdoor industry get a little bit more strong on moving towards promoting a diverse and inclusive approach to their businesses. How do you think that's changing? What does it mean to be outdoorsy and as a gateway to the outdoors? through our products, experiences, and representation and communication? And how do you see the industry promoting a more inclusive outdoor experience? And I think the way we could start is if you kind of give people a general overview of the sort of the chronological take on the evolution of the outdoor industry, being that you have been in it for quite a while.
Does that mean I'm old? So
Yes.
yeah, thanks. True, I did start in the outdoor industry in the 60s, working at Frederick Ski and Hike in La Jolla. And so I've grown up in the outdoor industry. I think what we add to the conversation, hopefully, is talking about how the outdoor industry, which is gear, tourism, and outdoor recreation, can be an economic engine if we harness it correctly to support 30 by 30 and support all the challenges that we have in front of us. And, you know, reflecting back, and again, this is revisionist history, but, you know, I think it's helpful to look at where we are today. By looking back at where we've been, we are definitely experiencing a renaissance in outdoor recreation. And there's kind of been 3 back to nature movements in the last 100 years. There was the late 1890s that, you know, with the Chautauqua movement, that's when Roosevelt, Muir, Sierra Club, National Park Service formed, Forest Service. And some of that came out of people looking to nature for healing after the Civil War. At least that's the take I read. I think the irony is not lost that that was also the emergence of Jim Crow. And, you know, we were right in the middle of indigenous genocide. So, but that was kind of the first outdoor back to nature renaissance. The second came in the 60s and 70s, which was the time that sort of birthed the modern outdoor industry. That was sort of a counterculture movement. It was a time when rivers were on fire. The Civil Rights Movement, the Wilderness Act, clean air, clean water, and that whole movement would birth the outdoor industry. And today, which is you know, a $780 billion behemoth and employs about 5 million people in the US. And the numbers in California are equally as impressive, in that California leads the nation in this area. And then today, COVID sort of turned the trends on their head, where we added in 2020 7 million new participants, which was the biggest jump ever measured in outdoor participation. So let me talk for a second about how the outdoor industry evolved. In the 60s, most of the gear was imported from Europe. It was really designed for a different kind of recreation. They didn't have the incredible public lands that the West does. And so our activities, how we enjoyed the outdoors, was quite a bit different than in Europe. And so it was imported Europe gear that was dated and outmoded, and then government surplus. You know, back to the days when, as a kid, shop at Fairs Surplus down in downtown San Diego, buying old World War II surplus camping equipment, which again, not really up to the task. And so at that point, the retailers there was a creation of, there was probably 50 outdoor specialty stores in Southern California alone. And outdoor retailers were very missionary. and as well as a place that young people or enthusiasts could hang out, and it became its own culture around the outdoors that was focused on outdoor retail stores, who most of them ran classes out of their stores, introducing people to the outdoors. But it was mainly most of us got introduced to the outdoors through family, friends, and then found access through an outdoor store. So as the market matured and got bigger, there was a shift to fashion. It was, more how to sell lifestyle clothes, t-shirts and hats, and drive business. Retailers got out of teaching much. Of course, there's still a few like REI that are still in that business, but it was really brands were talking about experience. This was the rise of Mall America. And if you went into an outdoor store, they became very core oriented. So you either were buying a t-shirt or you were dealing with folks hanging out talking about their last climb. And if you were a newbie, it was a pretty foreign culture and not very welcoming. And parallel to all this was the urbanization. As we became more dense and people moved to the cities, you didn't have nature on the block anymore. If you couldn't afford to go outdoors, if you didn't have someone that took you there, you didn't go as a kid. And I can remember in the late 90s sitting in an outdoor industry association board meeting talking about BTDs, butts through doors. We didn't have them anymore. People were not coming into our stores. And we started to see the beginning of a long trend towards less and less folks going outdoors. And very troubling was the fact that we really saw a decline in young people going outdoors. And some of those things we see today. I don't know, did I get to the question there? So.
Yeah, you did really well. And the thing that I like about you being able to approach the chronological evolution of the outdoor industry is that if we put it in parallel to what has been going on here on the land here ever since the first immigrants arrived in the late 1400s, it really helps outline when and where the inequities became larger within the outdoor industry. Because you talk about 1890, right, being one of the first evolutions of the Renaissance, and the amount of genocide, approved genocide going on for Black Americans, for Asian Americans who, at that time, well, both those groups weren't really considered Americans, and for the Native peoples and anyone not fitting that idyllic American race at the time. And we still feel so many echoes of that, right? So in the 1890s, all of the groups that were here had somewhat more equal access to nature because there was more nature compared to the population size. We were only about, I think, 10 million people at that point in time. And then as more development increases and you start to see those inequities grow, the access to nature for approved Americans, white Americans mostly, increases, and the access to nature for those of us that were not seen as part of that decreases. And so the gap that starts to develop, even in the 60s and 70s, just starts to become larger and larger. And then as development increases between that, it only shoves those gaps even farther away because of the people that are able to actually show up with the resources or finances to find those outdoor shops or be welcome in those towns. And so I think we've and then there was some naivety going on in the outdoor industry of just kind of wondering, like, why aren't more people showing up? Because the education that each of us got based on our own lived experiences and the social conditioning that was racism to keep certain people down and squeeze them out of places wasn't really part of everyone's education. And so now that we are coming to this new renaissance where the number one step is creating a more equal education on what the true human experience has been for all people on the land that we're sharing, is creating an interesting dynamic in the outdoor industry, trying to play catch up and not realizing how much of the industry is a benefactor of some of those genocides and displacements. And it's a very humbling experience to be on many sides of that equation. Me personally, I'm a mixed race person, I'm lighter skinned. And I've also been born and raised in the industry. My parents started our company around the same time that Steve started his. So, full disclosure, Steve and I know each other pretty well. And there's certain people within the industry that I greatly trust that have been aware and working to dissolve some of the issues over the past decades, for sure. The industry has also grown and changed in such a way, which Steve has already talked about, that this whole shift to brand image and retailers aren't doing as much of the teaching, and brands are really the ones talking about the experience and seen as the ones who can provide this level of funding to help get the outdoor industry out of the dark ages. But the brands that have the most most resources might not necessarily be the ones that are the most equipped to understand the nuances of what's going on. And so, smaller brands and smaller organizations, and trying to shift more to the organizations actually doing the work to move things forward, like Outdoor Outreach, like Thrive Outside, like SOS, is where I see the dynamic as needing to shift. I think getting people to recognize brands is definitely helpful for our survival, because the only way we survive is selling product, and the product is developed to hopefully help make it more fun and easy for people to get outside. But that's not but getting people outside and having fun and making sure that there's a welcoming environment, that's not the main wheelhouse of product manufacturers. We are very focused on what we need to do to keep our business alive. And those of us that have a vested interest and a little bit more empathy and a little bit more care for why we're doing what we're doing, we've got bandwidth and we've got advocacy and we've got efforts, but we might not be the ones with the large amount of dollars to really make moves. And so I think we're seeing a large band of us try to participate more in advocacy, which is where Steve and I are both on a board together for CORP, California Outdoor Recreation Partnership. And, just to move along a little bit in the conversation, you brought up how, the renaissance that COVID brought along and brought 7 million new people to the outdoor industry, which the outdoor industry has been begging for forever. More participation. We need more participation. Where is everyone? Let's get more people.
But in 2020, as excited as we are to see this uptick in participation, the numbers really are still pretty dismal. We're still talking about only 50% of Americans went outdoors if we, in the last year. And 75% of the participants in outdoor recreation in 2020, even after all the talk and work on equitable access, which became, a real trending buzzword, 75% in 2020 were white. So we're not making great progress. And, I have to stay positive that we're moving in the right direction, but we have so much work to do. And, and that shift from getting outdoors with family and friends to getting outdoors through programs like outdoor outreach, opening the outdoors, the Outdoor Foundation, Thrive Outside. That takes money. And, you know, we've really, yeah, I think Madeline brought it up and Carolyn brought it up. It's really about money for recreation and money for access.
Yeah, Madison, you dropped a great question in there and a great point, because as Steve was talking about, you know, 50% of Americans going outside, and Madison is saying, how are we defining who goes outdoors? Walks in local parks, mountain climbing? Just curious. And that is something that has evolved a little better within the outdoor industry, what's considered going outside. Because I mean, if your mailbox is outside and you walk down the street to your mailbox, you're going outside. And I think there's a lot of self-definition that, so, you know, when outdoor industry or snow sports industry sends out information gathering surveys, it's how do each of us even recognize if and what we do that would be considered getting outdoors. I mean, I think it's pretty safe to assume that whether you pre-COVID, whether you're walking to school, walking to your car, like everyone hopefully gets outside even a minute. I mean, even prisons allow you yard time. But what do we actually consider going outside? What is that? And I think that there's some
Danica, that report is in the chat now. So if people, the OIA's report, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're good. So that's great. So now there are more definitions associated within OIA's report around what getting outside means. You know, I think the industry used to define it much more as actually destination style recreation. And the reality is, because of the overdevelopment that we're seeing everywhere, where parks haven't really been put into consideration, or just leaving, I mean, spaces between our houses even, or, you know, what type of materials we're using to build roads and sidewalks, and how much just massive materials we're putting between people and planet. And I think, again, part of the COVID conversation and early efforts that went on to keep people from going outside, that luckily got a lot of groups together to say, whoa, why are we shutting down all of these outdoor areas that are really not only completely necessary for sustainable life? I mean, we need to breathe fresh air, but also very healing, have massive impacts on all of our mental health. And that was something that Recreate Responsibly, I feel like came out of the pandemic to help create a public, visible movement around just how many people actually are committed to going outside, even if that means something small and local. And I remember one of the most wild displays of trying to keep people from being outside in the initial stages of COVID was watching a paddleboarder alone out on the ocean, getting trapped between the Coast Guard at sea and a cruiser on the beach. And you're like, okay, well, what's the actual goal here? And so, you know, all of us working together, multiple people have said it, having diverse voices at the table. We're lucky that there are some diverse voices already existing that have been in the industry. And I think that there is a much larger call to have more voices and more involvement, especially when it comes to working with tribal communities, where thankfully there are still tribal communities that have maintained their connection with the land and their stewardship of the land, and are willing to continue to work with those of us that want to deepen our education and want to understand more how to be better stewards on our own, and how to really come together at the point that we are now in the world, and what can we do.
You know, go ahead.
No, that I was about to ask you a question, so you go for whatever you got.
Yeah, I was just thinking maybe we segue to question 2 around, you know, this tension between, if we look at the three emerging trends of lack of equitable access, that urbanization thing I was talking about, the enviro justice issue of sprawl that left huge swaths of low income areas with no parks. So you've got that happening on, and then you've got, on the other hand, you've got over tourism to where the most iconic destinations are, those communities are really impacted, and the resources impacted by over tourism. And that's not just iconic destinations, that's throughout even our own county. If you go to trailheads on a weekend, you know, it's backed up cars and people double parking. So, and then you take that third piece, which we've all talked about, which is the underfunding of recreation infrastructure, the dollars for managing that recreation. And, you know, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but to this group, but, you know, the fact that fire has dominated the culture in the last 20 years of the Forest Service, even though there's a huge need for recreation management and infrastructure, it's about fire in that culture. And, you know, the people that are rising up in many of those cultures and leading them come from fire, not from recreation. So you've got this merging of serious issues. And in the middle of that, we have 30 by 30, which I actually see that as gives hope, because it means there's new purpose, there's new initiatives, and hopefully more money focused around these issues. And it's counterintuitive that more recreation and more investment in recreation is going to be helpful to preserving 30% of our land. But really, that's the economic engine in these communities that helps communities and certainly indigenous communities do this just transition from an extraction economy to something more sustainable and become these protectors and stewards of this precious 30%, this land we're trying to conserve in order for a natural climate solution. So it's tricky because, you know, looking to private investment usually ends up exacerbating the issue of mass tourism. And, you know, the idea of a big hotel, big resort, big cruise ships, that's not, I mean, that brings money into the community, but most of that money leaves the community, where human powered outdoor recreation can in fact, there's some great studies about it, leaves more money locally and engages the community. So it can be done thoughtfully, but we need more trails. We need more recreation infrastructure, both locally and in rural areas, in order to spread folks out, defer the impacts. And if it's done right and there's money to manage it, I personally believe we can do both. We can conserve the biodiversity. I'm a conservationist first and a recreationist second. So I believe we can preserve the diversity, but engage more people. And we have to engage more people. If we don't engage that electorate, if 75% of outdoor recreation is people using this land, you know, if those people don't reflect the electorate, why would people vote to spend money on that when they're not enjoying it? So we've got to engage the whole electorate, and it kind of starts with that equitable access, getting people access to parks within 10 minutes of their home. So I'm really excited about 30 by 30. And I really see it not only in this country, but throughout the world. I mean, California and the US are so far ahead of these other areas as far as developing resources to help these communities in their commitment to 30 by 30.
Mhm. Yeah, so I'm gonna quote you here, something that we talked about as we were prepping for this call. If we hope to preserve 30% of the planet, it should be for more than just the climate. It should be because people have fallen in love with nature. And I think, you know, some of the concerns that I have heard over 30 by 30 and some of the things that I'm certainly curious about is, you know, where is that human element weaved in, and where, you got a new best friend, Steve, and where, you know, where is our actual focus on the development that is squeezing recreation and conservation into these holes? Is 30% even enough if we're talking about planet protection and human interaction with the planet? Because, you know, I think for a very long time, and what I noticed getting into corp, and, you know, very much guided and mentored by Steve, whether he wants to be my mentor or not, is that a lot of the conversation has been strictly around where does conservation end and where does development end. And so then when you're working on the actual human interaction with nature, where can humans interact with nature? These areas that we're conserving, if you're not educated in the right way and you don't actually know how to navigate these areas, and I don't want to steal and cheat from the conversation coming later that I was lucky enough to be witness to in another pre-panel, but you know, if you don't really know what you're doing and stumbling around and destroying things in these conservation areas, that's not a place for just anyone to recreate. And so where is that place? Because in a lot of cases, development, the forces of development are so much stronger in this country and can push right up to that line of conservation. And then where's the human element? Where's our access to nature? Where are we allowed to still be a part of the planet? Because we are a part of the planet. So we only have,
You know, I think
four minutes left, Steve.
Quoting, you know, RUMAP has sort of been a vanguard of the discussion about people need to feel comfortable, they need to feel welcome in these spaces. And so as we see this new group of urban newbies to outdoor recreation, and then they want to go outdoors and they want to go to the Sierras or the Cleveland, is they need to feel comfortable. And so having resources that help them understand the impacts on the forest, how to recreate responsibly, that's a great group and has done a terrific job. Well, did we miss something here, or
Yeah, I mean,
what are your last thoughts?
Yeah, I think just to kind of wrap up some of the other things we had talked about ahead of time, is that we all know that over-tourism is an issue. And, you know, when you, just your last statement about people coming from urban communities and finding challenge in integrating back into nature, I think we all have to recognize that it's the overdevelopment that we've been a part of for the last, let's say, 100 years. That's not people's fault that they've been disconnected from nature to the level that it's a new stage interaction. And I think that we need to have a little bit more grace with people that show up that are so used to what operating within a city looks like. You know, there's a trash can every so many feet. There's a bathroom, all these resources that we've created as creature comforts for people that aren't really a necessary part of our human existence and aren't found in nature. It's like we need to help people get a reassociation with where the benefits in nature are and why those things that they're used to don't need to be out here, because we don't want to turn all of our nature spaces into cities just because we've been so compacted by what development looks like and what cities looks like, and why, you know, being a little bit like being able to be so high maintenance in cities that you can just get access to anything that you could think of that you want and need. That's not what communing with nature is. That's not what it's about. So, you know, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and underline that is investment in good people, in rangers that, and I'm not talking about necessarily cops. I'm talking about rangers. I mean, Chantel lit up when we talked about education. It's that approach to welcoming these folks that are out there through an educational process, but it costs money, and it's pretty critical. And lastly, I did want to say that yeah, I lost it.
Okay, well, I will wrap it up by answering this question. Jackie asked, do you have advice on how to find...
I know what I wanted to say. Sorry.
Hit it.
It was, we talked about the role of the outdoor industry, the big brands, what they can do. And brands is kind of what they do. They brand things. They're great marketers. They do great branding. And, we need to get them at the table to help give those messages. I mean, frankly, our great public lands agencies are great at a lot of things. Branding and messaging isn't always how, that's not their background. That's not what they're excellent. Some of them are great at it, but overall, the outdoor brands can really help us in the messaging, and can help us talk to people and be great ambassadors to this message. And so, I mean, a good example is how many of us outside of this room of 200 people or whatever can name more than 3 wildlife refuges? Probably very few, but it's an opportunity for the outdoor industry to really talk about what a great system we have. Everybody knows about our national parks, but when we're working on the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is way outside of most people's imagination to get to, how do we talk about that? It's brands that can help us tell that story, and it's getting people in the pictures, and recreation is part of it. So anyway, go ahead, Danica.
Yeah, so I just want
we got to close it out.
We got to close it out. I told you it was risky giving Steve and I the mic alone. But so Jackie's question, do you have advice on how to find and contact outdoor brands that would be willing to support smaller equity efforts on a local level? The reason I really want to answer this question is because, yes, brands are going to be a big part of the equation. Brands are not a monolith either, though. If you're contacting smaller brands, please be willing to work with them on bandwidth efforts, on things that you can have some thought equity conversations around. Smaller brands are a lot of times doing what they can to just survive, and margins can be really thin. Bigger brands, absolutely. Funding is a way that they can participate if they don't really know what's going on and don't feel like they have the people or the education to be a part of the conversation solution. Then those are the brands that you want to try to tap for funding to be able to make sure that the people that can be a part of the solution have the resources they need to get it done. So
yeah,
yes.
I think looking to like Outdoor Foundation, the Thrive Outside campaign that's now moving to 8 cities and going to 16 is a partnership of the outdoor industry and local on the ground, boots on the ground. Locally, San Diego Foundation, Opening the Outdoors, Thrive Outside San Diego. These are all resources to engage with the outdoor industry.
Absolutely. All right, we've got to pass it over. Thank you very much.
Back to you, Chantel.
Yes, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Danica. No, I know that there's a lot of people on this webinar here that would love just to sit and talk to the both of you and throw questions at you for another hour, but there may be potentially some more questions for Danica and Steve in the chat. If you have a question for Danica and Steve, throw it in the chat and they can answer it as we continue to move on to the next session. Again, thank you. It's always fun listening to Steve and Danica, and having them together has been great. So now I would like to move to our last session and one of the highlights that I'm really looking forward to. And I want to introduce our California State Parks and our Indigenous Stewardship panel discussion speakers. First, we have Dr. Walt Lara Sr., Victor Bolayetz, Martina Morgan, and Nina Hapner. Dr. Walt Lara is renowned wisdom keeper and spiritual leader of the Yurok tribe. Victor is district superintendent for the California State Parks. Martina Morgan is the Kashaya Pomo cultural representative for the Kashaya Band of Pomo Indians. And Nina Hapner is the director of environmental planning for the Kashaya Band of Pomo Indians. Again, full bios will be posted in the chat. I encourage you to take the time to click on them and check them out. They've got some really great things that they've been part of. We're going to start the session with a brief presentation by Dr. Walt Lara Sr. that will set the stage for the next part of the session.
Start out. My name is Walt Lara Sr., Dr. Walt Lara Sr. I'm a descendant of Chapek, Stone Lagoon State Park, and Klamath River, Yurok tribes, my tribe. Keep going. I have about 5 things that I wanted to talk about, and it involves the national park as well as the state park, and some Bureau of Land Management land, and Green Diamond logging company. I have a pretty good relationship with Green Diamond and getting through and all, but not really such a good relationship with the national park. Every time the national park gets a new person that's in charge, things change. We've had in the 60s, whether it was 1966, somewhere in there, we met with the national park when they were proposing to get the national park, and they were ordered to meet with all the indigenous peoples of the area, and so we met with them we had I forgot to introduce Victor. Victor, raise your hands. Everybody can see you. Okay. He's state park
District superintendent.
superintendent. Yeah. Okay. So I'll have to go back. I'm like that the other guy on it. I forgot what I was going to say. We met with them, and they were supposed to meet. The Park Service was supposed to meet with all indigenous people, and so we met with them in ours. And the old folks at that time wanted to be able to use the beach as they had in the past. And I have a photo of that here, and where it takes about 10 to 13 days to dry their surface. They call it kegas when it's dried. They call it a day fish in the daytime, and we call it heki sloy. So it has different names for them every place on the Klamath River or on the coast, different places. So there's four or five names for them. But we got permission to camp down on the beach, and we got to dry our fish and catch the fish and the whole works to do that. And for about 3 years, the old people would go down on the beach, set up their camps and everything. And then the national park rangers came through and told them, well, they couldn't park their vehicles up on the top side. They'd have to go on the ocean side and park them. So they parked them on the ocean side, and then the following year was completely cut off. And we like to, in our time, like to get that back. So, and then, see, you got me. So now I got my background information here on this paper here, and we have Dr. Rock area where the GO road was going to go through. That's the Gasky Orleans Road that we took to the Supreme Court, and we lost. But we've worked it out pretty much with the national park to where we get just about everything that we asked for in the lawsuit. So it would have been easier. We at that time, Congressman Bosco was our congressman, and we went to him, and he tied the Gasky Orleans Road area onto a wilderness bill, and so that won't be built. And so at Stone Lagoon, Chapac, we worked on it a long time. I put together with myself and Chris Peters and Howard Ames and the late Dewey George. We put together the jump dance at Pequon, and we had that. That was after about 85 years of no brush dance, but a jump dance. So I got this here where we're about 150 years ago. This is at Refuge. They call it Safford's Island. The island washed away. And this is about 4 years ago. Same system. And we had a work with the state parks, and the hard one to work with was the
Coastal Commission.
give me that name.
Coastal Commission.
Coastal Commission. They thought that we were going to have a ceremony like Raw Gay on the river or whatever they call that, big party time and everything. And so we had a really hard time each time, and we were going to have the jump dance there afterwards. And my grandmother had told us all about it, and how they danced and where they danced and all this. And so we went ahead and started putting it together, and we had it. We had the ceremony, and it turned out real good. And we had it another time, and then Victor came aboard, and then it was simple. Every time that the park systems change leadership, we get changed, and we're not going to get changed anymore. And so it's going to be the way that it is, because it's the way that it was when my grandparents were alive. And so it'll be there. And we had, when the pandemic came, COVID-19, I guess you call it, when sickness used to come, or phantoms, there's no food and stuff, the Indian people would go to higher ground and dance to make it better. And so when the pandemic came, we sat there for a while. We were wondering what to do about it. And so we did. We set it up, and we were going to have the ceremony. And so we wanted it done real fast so we could get it done. And so we got the United Indian Health Service to give us direction on the rules and regulations, how close people could be and all that. And so we had that all took care of. That, well, we don't usually get other people involved in our planning because we're the boss. And there's two of us there. There's myself, Miss Peters, and then the medicine woman there was back in the medicine was going across the lagoon. and it's Otway Arch, it's a canoe, and it's a headman's canoe. That's the dude paddling. And so we did that. We started, we got that far, and we had Victor call the Park Service and tell them what we were going to do, the national park. And within an hour a day, it happened that fast. And we thought about that a long time, and but we had a man there that paid attention and listened to us when we wanted to do things, and he understood it. And so that's why I like to think it happened that fast. Okay, so Victor, do you have anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, thank you, Walt. I'm here representing California State Parks. We have procedures, policies, and all that good stuff. Europe people, they're in there, and families practicing jump dance for world renewal and balance in the world is a tremendous thing. It's not just for York people, it's for all people. So you have contemporary ceremony that was brought back after 85 plus year hiatus. When I first came into the seat in 2016, messaging from staff was that there's an event that happens over at Chalpec or Stone Lagoon, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. And environmental scientists had concerns, and other folks had concerns. There was a meeting that was scheduled with families. So those are tribal elders, medicine people, family representatives from different villages that sponsor these ceremonies. And I had staff ask me if they could not be present. I asked them what their concerns were, and I met with families. And there was one voice that was coming out fairly regular, and that was Dr. Laura. They were asking for being able to do this or do that on these lands. And I was saying, yes, that's reasonable. What can we do to support that? And it really came to a point of listening, and then looking, listening with a leaning towards yes, and how can we make this happen? First time that we went through this process with me here, it's like when you talk about Coastal Commission, are we going to make that the responsibility of Indigenous families to work with this agency and pull permits for contemporary cultural practice? That's something that agencies do, and that's something that we took over as state parks, getting those clearances. Having an understanding, listening, and then building trust is what made putting on jump dance during a pandemic very easy. There's a trust built with families and between myself as an agency representative. And that it really goes to saying what you mean and then following through on that. Indigenous people don't need to understand all the rules and regulations that we operate under as a state park system, but we should be able to facilitate contemporary ceremony and access for Indigenous people on our parks on ancestral lands. So when we had this conversation, I got a phone call. So Walt and Kishen and other leaders Indigenous leaders that already figured out what it looks like, worked with UIHS for pandemic protocols, called me discussing what those protocols would be. We had restrictions on how many people could gather across the state of California, and figured out what that would look like with keeping families segregated to their groups and households. Long and short is, they made it very easy to support, brought it to us with protocols. I was able to call my peer over with Redwood National Park and explain what's going on. 5 days of this 10-day ceremony, 5 days are on state park lands, another 5 days go through private lands, and then go up to national park lands. Based on a conversation and the relationship developed between families, state parks, and national parks, I got a verbal okay from National Park, called back Walt and other family members, and we had the jump dance going on in the midst of the pandemic. If you think about the significance of bringing things in balance, it was an appropriate time for it. It was important that the ceremony happened this year, that there wasn't a skip on it, and I was happy to support it. And Walt and family made it easy. But all of these things, the conversations, whether we're following governor's directives or whatever policies we have in place, it's developing relationships with people, and it's developing trusted relationships. That's I've written it down as we're talking about. Other folks are talking. Trust is one of those things that you have to build, and when you have it, you have to maintain it. I'll be quiet now.
No, thank you, Victor, and thank you, Dr. Walt Lara, for sort of setting that stage, and sharing your stories and the work that you've done up in Northern California to build these relationships and to build the trust. I think that is something that, coming from an agency perspective, we don't always do well. And, they are longstanding relationships that we need to build within the communities that we serve and the people that we serve. And so, again, thank you for sharing that. It is nice and refreshing to see these sort of success stories and baby steps to heal wounds that have been longstanding in the throughout our country. I want to, Walt, do you have something that you'd like to say?
Yeah, I do. I like
Okay.
to finish my statement, if I could, is that the pandemic was here. Everybody was getting sick. And what we asked for was some type of cure for that in our prayers that we were doing. And we asked for some kind of vaccine or something so that our people could start doing something again and kids could go back to school. So anyway, they got a vaccine made. And the people that were putting this advertisement out that they got this vaccine made in a record time. And so I feel, and all of our people feel, like that ceremony played a part in that, getting that pandemic in order through the creators that we were dealing with and talking to. So it works. And so I think that our beliefs and our religious ways of living have been recognized. And I'm sure, as much as I believe in my way and everything, I believe a lot stronger. And so that's what I want to say. And what I want to talk about next is the agreement that we had with the national park that was taken away from us. I started on it and somehow we got off in it. But I got a picture here of us living on the beach. It's an Indian house behind there. See, everything. And that's where they dried the fish and everything. What it was a fish camp. A fish camp that bartered and trade with other tribes and even non-Indian people that came in to get fish. That's what they call K-gas. Like I said, it had 4 different names. K-gas is when it was sun-dried. Esquisloy is when it's fresh in water. They run so thick, look like driftwoods in it, and that's what that says. Hey, koi is when it's in a box or a basket, going someplace. And pechach is when it's cooked around the fire. And so you got to know what you're talking about or who you're talking to or where they're from when they say they need this fish, so that you don't tell them, no, it's this, because everybody have different name for it. And so that what the fish camp was about. And so those people that went down there, like the late Jimmy James and late Dewey George and all the people that are involved with all the cultural programs in the state park right now, went down and stayed on that beach, maybe 13 days or so for those three years that we were permitted to. And it, for some reason or other, it just went away. And we've asked the Park Service, we've asked the workers in the park about that agreement, where's it at? And they say they don't have it. And so we need to work with someone to find out who has it, because we weren't the only ones. Every country, like the Philippines and all that had relationship with the United States, that was supposed to be that directive that they all were questioned about their needs, and so that the United States could give it to them and try to get it to them. This gentleman standing over there with a net in his hand, that's my father, that's my grandfather, okay? And then my grandmother, my grandfather in there, my uncles, and so, and that's the fish drying right there. Okay, so that's one of the reasons I'm here, is to work with somebody to try to get us back on the beach. Okay, now what other one we got here? Where did she go?
That's it.
That's it. There's a lot of things that I want to talk about on the fire, controlled burns. Indians. I was a forester. I was out in the woods one time with these guys, and they said that Indians weren't silviculturists. And I said, oh, baloney. They are, we had a little mouth fight there. And they were. I said, you see how pretty this forest is now? They said, yeah. I said, that's because the Indians managed it. They managed it with fire. Every 2 years, they'd burn in those areas. I remember when I was a little boy, I used to go out there. My dad would go hunting, and we could see him way down the hill down there. And we could see him raise his gun up. You could even see the exhaust coming out the end of the barrel of the gun. That's how clear it was. Now you can't see nothing because of the rhododendrons and all the stuff that they just let grow. And it was that way all over the place. It was where the forest was managed, to how it was done. This old man, his name was Glenn Moore. He said, the Walgays came here, he said. They said it was the most beautiful place in the world. That they threw their go pens away and started cutting trees. That's how he said it. Now, how they visioned it. So that's how that is. And when I heard the gentleman talking earlier, and I've been thinking about this a lot, about the fires that are happening here now, is that they could have been controlled burn. We had fires that were burnt 15 years ago, that the fuel's still laying out there and everything. That fuel just exploded and burned all the little trees up that were growing. And so that could have been managed. That could have been controlled burn, to where that destruction wouldn't happen to those little trees and create fires in other parts of the forest. Those are things, and I said this year I monitored from my house, okay? And I sit there and I listen to them talk. And I talked about how they should do it. And they said they're going to get back to me and we'll sit down, but they never ever got back to me. So that's what happens. And there's no follow through with their agreement that it's a good idea. I said to one group I was talking to that they had the prisoners up there. I used to use prisoners when I was a forester and use them to control burn where it needs to be burned so many feet from the road and all this stuff. And $250 a day for 12 of them. That's not very expensive from the alder camp. And so I try to explain to them what they could do. That's just on the radio that we were talking on, and it never ever happened. So that's it, the knowledge that people have about controlled burns is not being used. Same way with the roads. Back to his part of the national park, talking about the access and stuff. We have a road goes from Lost Man Creek clear to California Barrel up on the hill up there. That road could be open for the elders to go up there and see the most beautiful standing timber there ever is around there, and come back. You know, if I lived in Los Angeles and I had to drive all the way up here, I'd pay $20 to go through there. I might even pay up to $50 if I wanted to see it bad enough to take care of the ranger that's overseeing the job there. And maybe I'm not talking exactly how I should be talking, but I think that it could be done. In the same way, right in the national park, right there in Prairie Creek, that's where the Indians used to catch their salmon right there. From the coast out to Gold Bluff and Ossigan, they'd walk over this trail over there, and they would dry their meat, and they'd run the elk right down. They had a big hole down there with a brush fence, and they'd run them down there, and the elk would fall in the hole, and they'd shoot them with their bow and get them out of there, and they'd dry the meat, and dry the fish. Those things have to happen again. Okay.
No, thank you. Thank you for that and providing that insight to us. It's great for us to hear. I want to shift a little to Nina and Martina and your experiences and looking at, you know, from your viewpoint and your experiences, what are some successful examples that you've seen with relationships with Indigenous leaders and public land agencies or conservation organizations? Let's start with Martina.
I would say that a lot of the things that have been going on and are still going on are those helps with organizations and nonprofit organizations and government agencies, county agencies coming together and helping Kashaya people in general to purchase lands back, coastal properties, and in doing so, opening up those friendships to be able to have, you know, trails on the coastal bluffs and being able to keep the connection between that you know, California coastal hiking areas and, you know, from the south to the north and what have you. Not only that, but being able to open up, you know, places and spaces for building homes, apartments to better help our tribal members in the city limits. But also having those accesses to, you know, the open lands. And so those are some of the things. And I think Nina could touch more on that.
I like the way she punts that to me. So I would add the tribe has worked really hard in building back up relationships, or maybe just building relationships with the state park system and the other entities, the state entities that we deal with. So recently working with state parks, now Kashaya people within their territory can go into the state parks without having to pay, because you would still have to pay even as a tribal member within your traditional territory to go and collect. And the whole term is you shouldn't have to pay to pray. That's really ridiculous to have to do. But also we've started, at least in our area, because of with the marine protection area and some of the enforcement actions that are going on with people using, we've had occasions where our tribal members are kind of, as they molested, but being made to feel shame because they're out there collecting either mussels or seaweed, but it's stuff that they've collected for always and still collected even when they knew that the area had been restricted to them, but that's where their family area is. And that's where the seaweed is, or that's where the mussels are. And then being treated by law enforcement as though you're doing something bad when it's a part of your culture or your history. And that's how you teach your children to take care of the environment and the earth and to learn about being respectful and what reciprocity is. And then to be treated by a state agency or a state enforcement officer as though you're a criminal. That's who else really gets that feeling? Tribal people are the only ones who have to prove that they're tribal. Nobody has to prove that they're German. Nobody has to prove that they're Irish. You can say, hey, my mom's Irish. Well, okay, then you must be Irish. But if you're a tribal person, you're like, no, my community is Kashaya. Well, where's your card? Where's your number? That's disrespect. And that still happens. But when you build these trust relationships, like as Dr. Lara has said, building with Victor, things start to change. And quite honestly, some of the things that have helped us is the changing of the guard, so to speak. Old views leaving, new views coming in, and that new thought. And that doesn't necessarily mean old people, young people. It's the views on where your mindset is. And that's helped a lot for people to be open to that and to recognize that Indigenous people of California here have an inherent right that people have been ignoring, to be on that land, to make sure that land's taken care of, to make sure resources are taken care of, to pray there, to do ceremony there, and not feel like you're a criminal because that's what you're doing, because that's what you were taught needed to be done. And if you don't, it's hard to have healthy people, a healthy community if you don't have a healthy land. And if you don't have healthy land, it's hard to have a healthy community. So that building of that trust, that consistency, Dr. Lara's right. When you have a changing of administration come in, you don't know what to expect. Things that were understood and were not a problem, all of a sudden become an issue. And that really shouldn't be the case. And we don't have that consistency that's there.
I just want to add something to that. When we normalize what activities look like and people accessing ancestral lands, we're trying to lock everything we can up in agreements so we don't have to go back. It isn't a renegotiation. These are indigenous rights for access, for gathering, for practicing material cultural practices. And we need to get it normalized, and we need to memorialize it. It's like one of those things that Walt and others are always pushing me on. When are you gonna, what happens when you go? And we want to have that continuation of access that's established by our governor. I put a couple of links into the chat. There's a executive order from Newsom, and this is, I'll give you a quote for this. This is for developing policy for all state agencies from our governor. Adopting preferential policies and practices for California tribes to access natural lands under the ownership and control of the state that are located within California tribes' ancestral lands, including coordinating with local governments, zone natural land in excess of state needs in a way conducive to tribal access and use. So when you're looking at treating people with respect and giving people access, it's even as a government entity, it's what the governor has asked us to do. And the onus is on us as agency personnel to figure out how to do that.
I would just like to add that some of the things that you're talking about, touch on what we've always been talking about, as a tribe, remembering that tribal people have a cultural way of doing things, a way of reciprocity and stewardship, and being able to have a seat at the table and being able to teach those things and learn from also the other agencies and the way things work in the greater part of society, rules, regulations, and whatnot. But not only that, just being able to teach our rules of reciprocity and stewardship of how things work. To say like we have never always gathered in one site every single year. We would, restrict that area and then move into another area, and that's how those things become, come back every year. And that's how they become abundant every single year, so it's like every other year you go to one space, and knowing what place is a place to go gather and what place is a place to just go hang out and just have a nice time at the water to replenish your health and you just healing from the water itself and just relaxing in the sun, understanding that and knowing those places are really important so that we don't get the people that come in and destroy things that are supposed to help our community by feeding our community, because it's just not us tribal people who feed off the land. It is these longtime families who have came and settled the land per se, or and being able to have to, or being able to come to the table and have to ask these permissions or these rights for gathering and ceremonies, that's really difficult to have a Native American, say a traditional person, a cultural person, have to come to a table and say, we need our gathering rights. We need our ceremonial rights. We should never have to ask permission. Yes, we do have to work with agencies to follow rules and regulations. Yes. Is that difficult? Yes. It's hard to come in and have to say that, okay, we're going to allow someone to come into our ceremonies that have been private and special to our people for 10,000 generations and more, but we are willing to find that good space of friendship and resolutions to be able to move forward. And being able to do that means having a seat at the table, having a voice heard, and teaching and learning from one another.
You're muted, Chantel.
Thank you. Nina, I'm going to come back to you and we're going to wrap this up here. Is sort of, you have this group of people within this session. I'll go to all the speakers, but what is something that you want the people on this webinar to walk away with, thinking about, how either they work with Indigenous tribes, they listen to the people that share in their community. What do you want the group to walk away with, knowing from your experiences and the work that you do?
What I want is for people to start realizing we got old people that are retired. We got old people that can't walk these distances that they have open for your viewpoints. When there's roads out there that can be opened and those old people could drive through and have a good time looking at those nice, beautiful sempervirens, redwood trees in Northern California. That's what I like to see happen, okay? As well as the Indian parts of our life, the tribal parts is our ceremonies are allowed to happen without any problem. The hard part about this is getting people to understand it. We had a name change here a little bit ago from Patrick's Point to Sume Park, okay? And one of the people that's on that commission that makes the change thinks it's going to be an ongoing thing and everybody's going to have changes made. This wasn't a change of name. It was getting the old name back where it's supposed to be and getting rid of the other name. All right. So it's getting people to understand what our feelings is and how we want it is isn't in the outside Indian, not outside Indian, excuse me, ladies, the outside people that don't understand us and how we feel about our place.
Let me just,
Oh, go ahead.
Well, go ahead, lady.
Martina.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Laura. I was just wanted to touch on what you said. Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from when it's about name changing, right? Or changing back. I think part of that is the, teaching the people or the outer community, as we call the outer community, teaching them about why these places had these certain traditional cultural names, language names, and what they mean and why they were named those things. Some of the places are because of what is there, and some of the places are because of ceremonial sites. And that's important to remember, that we are here, we still are here, we will continue to be here, and knowing that is keeping our language alive, our languages. California is so diverse in different tribes and so many languages. And when I go, across lands, other territories, I see tribal language on signs. I see streets named after tribal lands, or, the place names, we call them. And I believe that's like one of the main things is really important to remember, that we are here, we do have a voice, and making sure that our voice is heard is a great thing. It helps us to make better friendships. It helps us to stay connected with the outer community. It helps us to make sure that the things that we've learned, we will teach. And where before we were hoarding our culture, hoarding our traditions, hoarding everything that we could because we had to save it. But here we are, making friendships to be able to share these things, to open this space, this place of conversation and teaching and learning, so that we can move forward. Now we are sharing because it's detrimental to the way society needs to move forward with us, not against us, or not with us thrown to the side or with us forgotten, but with us here today, and learning how we as a people, the Native community, has kept these things alive, strong, prospering, and just all the things that we need to live are still here because of the way we lived in the past and the way our ancestors lived in the past. And we want to carry that forward. And in doing so, we were following the rules of reciprocity and stewardship. We were following the rules of the land, the water, the air, the animals. It goes back to creation times when Creator created everything. There was all these rules that the spirits had come together to come together and follow, and remember that those rules were going to be followed here on earth. And that's how everything keeps growing and is still here. And if we don't remember that, every class of people, every kind of people in the world had this, and some people have forgotten it, and we hold on to it. So we want to remember that. We want to show that this is still here, and you can connect to those who don't have that connection and don't remember that. And that's why oral tradition has been so important for us, to remember all these things and be able to help one another. We want to walk away from the table knowing that you guys are hearing that the outside community is hearing that the Native community wants to be at the table. The Native community wants their voice heard. The Native community wants to learn, and we want to teach. And I think that's the greatest thing, that when I leave this table, that's what I want to make sure that people hear. We have been here for 10,000 generations and more. We have been here taking care of the land for so much more time than anyone could even write down. Oral tradition takes us back to the beginning of time, and we want to see it continue. And I guess that's what I want to say. Remember us, remember our voice, remember that we want to see it at the table. And for those who are not federally recognized, I know a lot of places they don't take their word for gold because they're not federally recognized, but they are a people.
Right.
They are a people, and they should be heard too. And if they need their neighboring tribe who is federally recognized to back them up and speak with them, then that also needs to be done too. Those who are not federally recognized still have a voice and they still have concerns. And I feel like they need a place at the table too. And that's important. Just hearing us, making collaborations, just living together as one and making sure that our community, our world keeps moving forward in a healthy, strong way so that our future generations can live in a healthy way and have these accesses to open space and be able to culturally access them for ceremonies, culture, gathering, rights, because I know when I go to the beach to go do whatever I need to do, it's either for ceremony or for gathering. I rarely am there to hang out at the beach. And if those things aren't there, I cry when I leave. Mm-hmm. When something is completely taken away because people don't know how to have respect or are not taught, that's sad for me. Like I walk away, like I was there when my great-grandmother taught me and her great-grandmother taught her and my great-grandfather taught me and his great-grandfather taught him. And it should be that way for generations to come, but it's not. And so I think one thing that also can be done is interpretation. Land interpretation, tribal interpretation, cultural interpretation, and the interpretation of what stewardship and reciprocity mean. And that's just a little bit, sorry.
That's good.
I have nothing to add. She caught everything I was going to add to it. So hooray, Martina.
Yeah, well, a lot of the secrecy comes from having to have secret ceremonies in secrecy during the first part of the Walgays coming here, because they didn't allow the people to have their ceremonies. They took a lot of their things away, and stole them and sold them, and we talked about that the other day. But I think that it's going to come out. It's going to come out because myself, what I know, I don't never keep a secret because those people told me because they wanted it to be heard by other tribal members, other Indian people. And so that's what I try to do up there is give out all the information that I possibly can. And except I don't tell my wife everything, but So it's when I went to the 8th grade in school, okay, and here I am thinking about all the things that I learned from the 1st grade to the 8th grade, and I learned nothing about California Indians in that California history book. Okay. So what I did is I wrote a book, trying to put a little bit of this things in there. There's so many things that I couldn't put in there because I was only limited to so many words on my chapter. Okay. And we're going to have to do another one. And I think that
Time's up.
Okay, we're going to need some help from you ladies and others that to put your part in it, because that was my hope, was that other tribes would see the book, read the book, and then write one of all the things that happened to their people and their tribes. It's tearful, it's sad, but a lot of it needs to be history for our people. Okay, well, now, thank you.
Victor, you have something you want to add, and then we'll close out here?
Yep. When we're thinking about 30 by 30, it's really looking for treating these lands that we have with respect and protecting what's there. I was at a government-to-government meeting recently, and one of the council members said that we need to stop or start to decriminalize culture and cultural practices. When we look at the characteristics that we think of as a spectacular ecosystem or natural landscape, a lot of people reflect on what the United States looked like when the first Europeans came here. Now let's put extraction industry up in this region for gold extraction and timber extraction and all of the impacts that you've had to landscapes. Indigenous people were managing these landscapes in a way that current thought is that's what we want to get back to. For us to tell Indigenous people how to be on the land, what they need to do on the land, and restrict activities when they were the best stewards that we've had is kind of shameful. I just want to acknowledge that Indigenous people and the way they interact with land. I've had Walt tell me, the land knows me and I know the land, and you treat it with respect. And when Indigenous people are coming in and utilizing ancestral lands, you don't need to set a bunch of rules for them on you must do this, you must turn left, you must do that. It's really giving people access to the original stewards who have done a tremendous job. And maybe those life ways and those lessons can help us get these landscapes back to a state where we can all enjoy them.
Great. Thank you, Victor. And I just wanted to say thank you again for all of the speakers here on this panel to give us their time, their experiences, and really share with us the work that you've been doing. It provides a lot of hope for me as a federal agency and as someone who works on federal lands of what opportunities and what just real relationships look like and what we can do to have these conversations and build trust with any partner that we work with. And so I really appreciate that. And thank you for your time. And for those that are on the seminar still, again, take a step back and think about the 3 different sessions that we had this morning and what maybe some common themes or little pieces of information that really, landed for you to reflect on and think about and grow in the work that you're doing in the communities that you serve and how you continue to expand your reach and who you have conversations with. So again, I'm going to thank you. We're going to close this out for just a reminder that for the leadership portion of this, you guys are going to come back in about 5 to 8 minutes and you're going to kick off that session. And again, thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. I hope it was valuable and hope these conversations continue. Thank you very much.